Good morning, and welcome to the award ceremony honoring 2010 Richard Driehaus Prize laureate Rafael Manzano Martos and 2010 Henry Hope Reed Award recipient Vincent Scully. I am Michael Likudis, Dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Notre Dame. Our university and school are honored to be able to confer these two awards to celebrate significant contributions to the public realm and the ideals of the traditional city. We thank Richard Driehaus for his act of civic virtue and generosity. His visionary acts in support of a built environment that will lead to better lives for all of us remains an inspiration to the School of Architecture and all practitioners of traditional architecture and urbanism. Each year, through the example of the Richard H. Driehaus Prize and Henry Hope Reed Award recipients, our students witness the best in traditional architecture and urbanism and an ethic of how not just to work in, but contribute to the communities which they live in. Our honorees today, Rafael Manzano Martos and Professor Vincent Scully, and indeed all our laureates in the 8-year history of this prize, have produced a diverse spectrum of beautiful and inspiring work that at its core shares a vision of how the idea of the classical unifies the world. Through the idea of the classical, our laureates show us how the monumental and vernacular buildings of the world speak to each other while celebrating their local cultures and environments, and how we connect the best of our historical achievements to our highest future hopes and aspirations. Rafael Manzano Martos shows us through his work how traditional cultures can endure and thrive today and in the future. Rafael's distinctive use of the mudéjar character of architecture, which emerged in the 12th century from the confluence of Islamic and Christian cultures, reflects his vision without straying from its classical roots. Indeed, it honors those origins while carrying the tradition forward in a way that facilitates contemporary life and inspires generations to follow his beautiful, humane example. His practice has concerned itself with preservation of architecturally sympathetic additions, restoration and adaptive reuse, the infill to the creation of new quarters and neighborhoods in the city of Seville, as well as new individual buildings in the city and country. In short, his work has engaged virtually every mode of practice. This he has done with a spirit of civic responsibility and love for his homeland and hometown, with humility and grace, not seeking recognition for himself. This year's jury was greatly moved by these attributes and believed that they reflected the values and the spirit of classicism such that Rafael Manzano Martos should be given the 2010 Richard H. Driehaus Prize. The common theme for the Richard Driehaus Prize and Henry Hope Reed Award is that our laureates impart a message of faith and the belief in the dignity of humanity, of civic spirit and urban order, the past and future as part of a continuum that we serve as stewards of our time. It is through their ideas and work that classicism and tradition are once again part of the mainstream of architectural practice. Of even more immediate importance, those methods provide the foundation for sustainability. Their time-tested techniques encourage the building of communities and cities that can endure and are the basis for an architecture of optimism. In an age of consumerism and virtualization of culture, Vincent Scully reminds us of the wonder of life, its rituals, and the physical environment that frames them. He deals in the eternal, defined as a respect for what has come before him and attention to the legacy he and we as a society will leave for posterity. Vincent Scully's legacy can be seen in the thousands of students, architects and otherwise, who were inspired not only by his legendary lectures, but by his example as an advocate for preserving the built environment that connects us physically and emotionally. That is the essence of human communities, and few have done as much as Vincent Scully to maintain the soul of society. I would like to recognize our jury for this past year: Adele Chatfield-Taylor, Robert Davis, Paul Goldberger, Leon Creer, and David Shores, and to thank them for their thoughtful consideration of the candidates. And of course, great thanks goes to Richard Driehaus, who through his generous spirit fills this prize with vitality and renewal. Before I introduce Paul Goldberger, Richard Driehaus Prize juror and architecture critic for The New Yorker, I would like to acknowledge the participants of today's program. Edward P. Bass, the 2007 Henry Hope Reed Award laureate, will speak on the life and career of Vincent Scully, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. Accepting the Henry Hope Reed Award and Medal for Vincent Scully, we are honored to have Robert A.M. Stern, Dean of the Yale School of Architecture. Dimitri Porphyrius and Leon Krier, the 2004-2003 Driehaus Prize winners respectively, will provide remarks on Professor Scully and Rafael Manzano, Martos. Then our patron, Richard Driehaus, will provide some closing comments. It is my pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, Paul Goldberger.
Thank you very much, Michael. Prizes in architecture, as in so many fields, are usually given to honor new discoveries and new developments, not, one hopes, merely to celebrate novelty, but to honor the new in a more meaningful way, by taking note of original thinking that had become widely influential, or that was likely to have a significant influence on the shape of the future. The expectation that a discovery would have an important and positive impact on our future is a reasonable criterion for a Nobel Prize in physics or medicine. But what about architecture? How do we measure influence? And is that even the thing that matters? Indeed, is being new even the test of greatness? It is important not to forget a line so often attributed to Mies van der Rohe, one that many people in this room may find more to their liking than his famous aphorism, "Less is more." We should remember that Mies also said, "You cannot invent a new architecture every Monday morning." In other words, novelty is not all that it is cracked up to be. The view that novelty is not an end in itself, and certainly not the ultimate architectural test, is perhaps the first of the ideas underlying the Driehaus Prize, which was established, as you know, in 2003 by the generous and enthusiastic patron of art and architecture, Richard Driehaus, to honor a major contributor in the field of traditional and classical architecture. It was Richard Driehaus's view that the profession of architecture, not to mention the public that experiences architecture, had become seduced by the very thing that Mies, of all people, warned us against, which is novelty for its own sake. The Driehaus Prize was created to break apart what we might call the unholy alliance between the idea of quality and novelty, the mistaken belief that to have quality, you have to have novelty. Richard Driehaus knew otherwise. He was aware how much distinguished architecture was created that didn't seem, at least outwardly, to be new and different, and he wanted to be sure that it got its proper due. Well, by now, with 8 winners of the prize extending around the world, it surely has. The fact that this prize contains a larger monetary award than any other prize in architecture hasn't hurt, of course. But this is actually the least important of the many things that distinguish the Driehaus Prize, although I suppose the recipients could be forgiven, at least this morning, if they think otherwise. But for the rest of us in this room, what makes this prize remarkable is not only the extraordinarily generous amount it contains, but also the remarkable generosity of thought behind it, the enlightened thinking behind the prize, which is far more subtle than it might at first appear to be. This is not so different from other prizes as it might seem, since the Driehaus Prize, too, honors the new. In the work of Leon Krier and Quinlan Terry and Dimitri Porphyrios and Alan Greenberg and Jacqueline Robertson and Andres Dwani and Elizabeth Platter-Zyberg and Abdul Wahad El Wakil, and now in the remarkable work of Rafael, Manzano, Martos, we do not see a denial of the present. The work of these distinguished architects is not based on some foolish fantasy that we can will ourselves into the past, but on the far wiser belief that the present is not as disconnected from the past as some might think, and that it deserves not to be rejected, but to be learned from. And, most important of all, that the various architectural languages that we have inherited and have stood the test of time can continue to be vehicles of serious, even profound, creative expression. That's the key thing, and the reason the Driehaus Prize, in the end, isn't as different from other prizes as it might at first seem to be. It honors creativity and the ability to invent and the ability to do new things just as much as any other prize does. It just asks that these new things be created in the languages that have come down to us through the generations. As a great poet can say something compelling and new by brilliantly using the language we all know, so can a great architect prove that working within an existing architectural language need be no bar to creative expression, even to great inventive power. Every Driehaus Prize winner, to some extent, has shown us exactly this. Over the years, the prize and its jury have become, if anything, even more cognizant of the notion that the words traditional and creative need not be mutually exclusive. Under the wise leadership of Dean Michael Lakoutis, the jury has extended the reach of the prize around the world and has also focused heavily on urbanism, recognizing that traditional urbanism is at least as essential to honor as traditional architecture, and arguably more urgent a social priority. It's hard not to mention, when talking about the global scope of this prize and its focus on urbanism, the unusual jury process of the Driehaus Prize. The jury chooses winners not by gathering in a random conference room somewhere or by some kind of email process, but by traveling together to a city of great architectural significance, exploring it together, and only then beginning to discuss the nominees, taking the city's urban fabric as a kind of backdrop for its deliberations. In recent years, the jury has met in Paris, Prague, Buenos Aires, and Washington, all very different cities that each offer different lessons in the ongoing meaning of traditional architecture and urbanism in our time. By traveling around the world, the jury is not seeking a winner whose work in any way literally resembles the architecture of that city. The goal is different. The jury is hoping to be inspired by the way in which traditional architecture in the city it is visiting continues to create a viable and living present, and a sense of an urban whole. The settings of the jury deliberations, you might say, are intended to keep the jury focused not just on architecture as a series of objects, but on architecture as urban form, and on architecture's role in the making of place. In the end, that is what the Driehaus Prize seeks to encourage: architecture's ongoing role in the making of civilized places. Finally, a word on the related prize, the Henry Hope Reed Award, which emerges out of the recognition that as the ultimate public art, architecture needs to find a public, and that as we honor the makers of great architecture, it is equally worthwhile to honor those who have helped to promote traditional architecture. This award has gone to extraordinary writers, editors, teachers, and patrons. It is exceptionally meaningful to me, as I know it is to so many in this room, that this year the Henry Hope Reed Award goes to Vincent Scully, the great architectural historian whose lifetime of work has done so much to emphasize the relationship of architecture to all of culture, as well as to teach so many of us, myself included, about the deep connection that architecture can have to both the written and the spoken word. Vincent Scully has written more movingly than anyone else alive about what architecture can mean to the making of community. And he has called architecture a continuing dialogue between the generations developing across time. That view of architecture, a continuing dialogue between the generations developing across time, is not only a wonderful way of thinking about the essence of the building art, it is also as good a summary as we could ask for of the ideals that led Richard Driehaus to create the Driehaus Prize and bring us all together in celebration here this morning. Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm honored to call to the platform another winner of the Henry Hope Reed Award, Edward Bass. Ed?
Ladies and gentlemen, today we share the privilege of gathering to honor a great scholar, a great teacher, and a great man, Professor Vincent Scully. We're here to bestow upon him the Henry Hope Reed Award. This award, born out of the energy and generosity of Richard Driehaus and the leadership of Michael Lakutis, is presented annually, and I quote precisely, to an individual working outside the practice of architecture who has supported the cultivation of the traditional city, its architecture and art through writing, planning, or promotion. While eminently qualified to receive this award, the achievements and the influence of Vincent Scully extend well beyond the cultivation of the traditional city, its architecture and art, and transcend mere issues of style, taste, and opinion. As a scholar and an author, Professor Scully's life work has brought into the arena of architectural history, the full breadth of the cultural and natural worlds. He has framed the field in an expanded context that both elevates his study and deepens its insights. As a teacher and mentor to some of the most important architects and influential decision makers of the latter half of the 20th century, his impact has been profound. His views have informed and guided the discourse of historians, critics, and practitioners alike. As a student entering Yale as a freshman in 1936, at age 16, and earning his bachelor's degree in 1940, Vincent Scully encountered the field of architecture at the height of the so-called battle of the styles between the traditionalist and modernist approach to architecture. By the time he received his PhD at Yale in 1949, with service in World War II having intervened, it was widely regarded that the modernists had won the architectural war. But Scully's work took a more inclusive and historically informed approach. His PhD thesis of 1949 expanded in 1955 to his brilliant book, The Shingle Style and Stick Style, Architectural Theory and Design from Richardson to the Origins of Right. You will find that Scully often abstracts his thesis in his long titles of his books. This brilliant book taught us to see the shingle cottages of the New England shore as a part of a legitimate architectural tradition worthy of high and serious regard. This point of view reflects a recurring theme in Scully's work, finding virtue and excellence in examples of American architecture and planning that previously might have been regarded as modest and ordinary. But more than that, the book articulates themes that redefine the world's view of America versus Europe in architecture. Scully placed the work of Henry Hobson Richardson, Louis Sullivan, and Frank Lloyd Wright into a clear perspective, that of being both a part of a 100-year continuum of architecture in the Western world spanning both sides of the Atlantic, and at the same time uniquely American, derived from our culture, landscape, and worldview. Lord Norman Foster, Scully's student while a Mellon Fellow at Yale in 1961, studying architecture under Paul Rudolph, said, quote, "The insights of Vincent Scully opened my eyes to the interactions between the old world and the new." Philip Johnson, by the way, described Professor Scully as, and again I quote, "the most influential architecture teacher ever." I could go on, quoting Bob Stern as well. I will leave that to come straight from the dean's mouth as he follows me on the program. Not to mention David Schwartz, Tom Beebe, Caesar Pelli, Jim Polshek, Charlie Wackme, and many others, all his students. I picked those only as those architects recently or currently doing buildings at Yale. While it is doubtlessly easier to transcend the battles of style, and that's what Scully did, transcend the battle, in the world of architectural history than in the world of contemporary architectural practice and criticism. One of Scully's great gifts to his students has been to give them the intellectual and philosophical basis to pursue architecture on their own stylistic terms, in their own time, in their own place, free of the constraints that ideology imposes on style. I know from my personal experience that architects practicing in widely disparate styles have found Scully supportive, thoughtfully critical where called for, but clearly intellectually supportive. Other works by Professor Scully throughout his career have had enormous influence on architecture's view of the world and the world's view of architecture. Three books in particular, again he goes for long titles: Earth, Temple, and the Gods, Greek and Sacred Architecture, Pueblo, Mountain, Village, Dance, and Architecture, the Natural and the Man-Made, all published in various original and revised editions between 1961 and 1991, school us, urge us to encompass in our thinking all that is man-made and all that is natural, together and co-equal as we contemplate and deal with the world in which we live. In Scully's view, both the built and the natural worlds can be, and where appropriate should be, thought of as sacred. As a keen observer of cities and our urban environment, Professor Scully's scholarship has provided the intellectual basis to back up what Jane Jacobs observed in practical terms, that traditional approaches to architecture and urban planning are capable of creating a far superior setting for day-to-day life than the modernist, Corbusier-inspired residential and commercial blocks of the 1950s and 60s. He has helped us appreciate that rich traditions of planning and development that built the towns and cities of America produced in most cases a far more pleasing and humanistic, and for that matter humane, environment than those of the heroic secessionists of modernist ideology. And no offense intended to the Austrian secessionists of the turn of the last century, who I much admire. I use the term secessionist here as a gesture to Henry Hope Reed. That was his term for modernism. Carrying the theme further, Scully is frequently and increasingly focused, even champion architecture born from regional traditions and culture, showing preference over the universal architecture that assumes a common vision to be applied to or imposed on all situations internationally. He recognized, for example, the Gothic and Georgian quadrangles at Yale to be rigorously planned and skillfully executed, and to appeal to the eye and body of those who live with them. He saw the pueblos of the American Southwest not as crude and primitive, but as artistically executed expressions of the life and culture they served and the natural world in which they are set. He has, over his career, demonstrated an admiration, even a preference, for architecture which reflects and serves the needs, aesthetic and functional, of those who create it and use it. Now, through his 7 decades as a scholar, even as distinguished as that career may have been, Professor Scully may be best known and certainly most loved as a teacher. For 63 years, he taught at Yale, beginning in 1947 and retiring only last year at the age of 89. In the course of these decades, literally tens of thousands of students have learned how to look at the world around them. They have learned how to see, appreciate, and understand buildings, the landscapes, and the cities that make up our built world, and how to think analytically and critically about them. The influence of his teaching has been enormous. Not only have his students gone on to become the practicing architects, planners, and developers of the past half century, that represents but a small percentage of them, but they have also become the citizen leaders who have contributed to building the homes, museums, schools, churches, and communities, and so much more in America. At Yale, Vincent Scully's lectures did not merely elucidate and educate, they also entertain, a mark of many of the greatest educators. The Yale Law School auditorium was always packed to the rafters for his class. It is the largest lecture hall at Yale and therefore where his lectures occurred. He famously employed a very long stick, 12 or 14 feet, not to keep students awake, that was hardly necessary, but as a pointer, gesticulating in a truly architectural scale as slides filled an enormous screen. More than once, he wandered in a burst of energy and enthusiasm right off the edge of the elevated stage, only to pick himself up, climb back, and continue, hardly breaking his train of thought or the spell over his audience. I would venture to say that more than one person in this room would not be here today were it not for Vincent Scully. I say that with confidence, ladies and gentlemen, because I am one such person. And doubtlessly among you, there are others. Thank you very much.
Established in 2005, the Henry Hope Reed Award is presented to an influential supporter of the classical architecture movement. Richard H. Driehaus and the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture bestow the honor annually in conjunction with the Richard H. Driehaus Prize for Classical Architecture. Past winners include Henry Hope Reed, who received the inaugural award in 2005, editor David Morton, environmentalist and philanthropist Edward Perry Bass, former director of the U.S. National Park Service Roger G. Kennedy, and Argentinian preservationist Fabio Gray-Mentieri. This year's Henry Hope Reed Award goes to the legendary Yale professor and inspirational leader of the preservationist movement, Vincent Scully.
My whole approach at the beginning was a visual one, and I was in Italy 51, 52. And there, I really became fascinated with towns. And I began to see that taking a picture in the Val d'Orcia, say, of a villa, you had to get the landscape too. So I began to see architecture, not the way it was published all the time in modernist books, which each one's separate, like something in accounting, but as part of an overall urbanistic continuum in which the man-made and the natural were parts of the same thing. Quoting Winston Churchill saying, we make our buildings and then they make us. And it's really true. But beyond our buildings, what architecture makes is the whole human environment. And that whole human environment in the city is one in which our buildings, just as you look, say Yale, where the Rudolph building follows the Kahn building, follows the building of 1928, follows the building of 1965. We're seeing the past generations develop one relation to the other, having a conversation. They do. A conversation. That's why it's so important to build in relation to everything else in your building in the city. It's why you have to, just the idea that every building is separate, has to be special, and it has to be inventive, and it can't get along with anything else, is destructive of the human environment. Architecture makes an environment in which we live, shapes us. And just the way our sculpture, for example, is an image as our bodies of the human act in relation to the environment. But the Rudolph's building leaps up and embraces the whole thing across the street, completes it. It's a wonderful conversation, literally a conversation, across generations. That's why, just a visual thing of telling you what the world is like and what it's like and how he's different from this one, but how he's like it, and how he's making the same place. That's what the city is doing. You build for in relation to the past, you build in the future picks up what you do. Of course, I've been involved in historic preservation for a long time, and especially since the destruction of Penn Station, like so many other people. You know, that's such a shameful, what they did to Penn Station in '63, of course, is the basic act. It was the basic act of, the basic crime that everybody recognized. Such a beautiful place, torn down purely for greed. You know, there's this great space. A long time ago I said we used to come in like gods. Perhaps it was too much. Now we're crawling like rats. And all of a sudden, once it happened, everybody saw it. But nobody tried to stop it. The National Register of Historic Places grew out of that outrage, what happened at Penn Station. And notice they say places, not buildings. In other words, they're talking about the human environment. And they understand this wonderful phrase. Earlier, I was marinated in modernism. And I love the heroic figures of modernism, the invention, as I saw it, that all modernists did. Now I see much more important than that is the integration of the creation of places and of housing people properly. Every building is in a continuum relationship to every other building, seen and unseen, in the world of the mind, in the unseen, in the seen, in the place, in the city, in that place. So I don't believe in background buildings. I think they're buildings, and they're important, and every one is important and does its job in its place. And every one is as difficult and so on as any other. And there's no need to have every building be different than every other. Oh, classical architecture understands that perfectly.
Vincent Scully, considered one of the most important interpreters of art and architecture of our times, has inspired generations of students. Yale alumni often cite his lecture courses as their most profound academic experience. We honor Vincent Scully with the 2010 Henry Hope Reed Award and thank him for his tireless efforts to preserve humane, sustainable urban design for the benefit of contemporary society and future generations.
In the end, it comes to the city as a whole, and to that immortality of human beings, making a place that can live beyond the generations, not torn apart by each generation, but getting better and richer.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Richard Driehaus to come forward so we may present the medal, the Henry Hope Reed Medal, to Robert A.M. Stern, who will accept it on behalf of Vincent Scully. So, Robert A.M. Stern.
First of all, I want to thank Ed Bass for that very beautiful talk. And of course, I'm honored to accept the Henry Hope Reed Award on behalf of Vincent Scully, who was and is my teacher, my colleague, and my friend. Professor Scully regrets that he is unable to be with us here in Chicago today, but he asked that I read a short statement of appreciation and thanks for this generous act of recognition for a lifetime in the service of architectural excellence. Professor Scully's words of thanks go as follows. I am deeply, deeply grateful for this award, and I sincerely regret not being able to be here in Chicago to receive it in person. I am especially moved by the fact that it is given in the name of Henry Hope Reed, with whom, as an unbearable young modernist, I used to disagree about everything some 50 years ago. But it is I who have changed more than he. It is true that my devotion to classical architecture, despite my love for Greek temples, will never be as pure or exclusive as his, and modernism too is in my bones. Still, the horrors of the urban renewal of the 1960s made me realize how destructive of the city modernist planning and practice was, and so set me on a course at least analogous to his own. It is in that spirit that I gratefully accept and am honored by this Henry Hope Reed Award. I thank you on behalf of Professor Scully.
Well, I'm actually supposed to deliver an epilogue, but no, it's not an epilogue, it's just a few ideas which perhaps may start a discussion, not today, but on another occasion. And I was thinking the other day coming here under incredible duress of science cities, what perhaps I should really call this address. And I couldn't really find the title, unless finally I came to the idea of the importance of reading Scully, with all the associations that that title may actually imply. Now, we do know that for years it made really little difference whether the fashion of the day was international modernism, whether the fashion of the day was high-tech modernism, whether the fashion of the day was postmodern deconstructivism. It made really no difference at all, because students, clients, and the lay and professional public have been repeatedly presented with the same deliberate obfuscation, namely that if universal strategies have been successful for industry and for market capitalization, they must surely be good and successful also for people. Successful for the buildings they live and work in, and successful and good for their everyday lives and their cities. Now, in my mind, the importance of reading Scully lies exactly in his very critique of such an assumption. Vincent Scully has been, I think, one of the first teachers to make us all aware of the perceived dangers of modernist, universalist strategies. We all have been, in one or another way, touched and influenced and molded by Vincent Scully's teaching. And it is the myriad stories told by his students that make up the portrait of Vincent Scully. I was a latecomer. I was not his student, but I wish I were, after I met Scully for the last 15 years in Yale. Going further back, in 1966, I remember, was the first time I came across his name, and I was still then in high school at the Greek American Athens College, and I came across a book called The Earth, the Temple, and the Gods, a book of 1962, and though Greek, I should have been proud that anybody wrote something like this, but in those days it was an anathema to be interested in whatever fashion with the old stones. I was moved, however, I remember, by Scully's not praise of classical architecture, but by Scully's mythic obsession with the sighting of ancient Greek buildings, not just temples, temples of course foremost, and their relationship to the landscape, their relationship not just to the landscape, but the relationship to the sun and their relationship to the sea. Now, the story that is told in this book is in fact a story of rootedness. Rootedness to land and by extension rootedness to culture. And that story, it was one that Scully was to return again and again, as for example in his books Pueblo, Mountain, Village, Dance, or in his later book, or earlier rather book, depends which version you look at, The Shingle Style. Now later, during my student years at Princeton, I read probably all of Scully's books, and perhaps later during my dissertation years, perhaps all his articles. But I read them amidst the raging debates between the whites and grays. And I had actually followed, I remember, some of his lectures at Yale. But still, I didn't really understand him fully, because I was under the spell of Neo-Corbusianism. I was under the spell of Michael Graves, and I had actually come to the decision in those days that I was really inclined to agree with the whites, for after all, they were meant to lay claim to the rationalist purism and the immaculate beauty of positive Philibin solids. When later in the mid to late 70s, I was again confronted with the importance of reading Scully. I had already spent a year at the atelier of Alvar Aalto, studying the forbidden curiosities of additive composition, the seductive appeal of placemaking, and the tactility of materials and tectonic construction. And it was at that time that my heart and mind and feelings actually came closer to the writings and teaching of Vincent Scully. Not just closer, but Vincent Scully loomed again with a renewed relevance and importance. Not only for his emphasis on the Greek classical order, but rather more significantly for his appreciation, even passion, of the art of placemaking. I could now see for the first time clearly the three major interests which fueled Scully's passion for a better world. Firstly, the importance of local cultures as opposed to universalism. Secondly, the importance of placemaking as opposed to random encounters. Thirdly, the importance of humanism as opposed to industrial positivism. For Scully, the classical project is relevant not because it has been handed down to us from generation to generation, but only in as much as it can address local culture and local character. For Scully, the millennial survival of the classical owes much to its embracing translation and accommodation. Because translation, accommodation, revival, of course, always entail some loss of the original. And by extension, they're always regarded as somewhat provisional and experimental statements. And when introduced by Robert Stern to Venturi, that is how Scully approached complexity and contradiction, thereby discrediting international modernism. For Scully, architecture, like ballet, like literature, is an art of repertory. Great works are regularly revisited, reworked, rewritten, and repeated. And every time they are translated, every time they are revived, every time they are adapted, modified, or recast, they highlight both change and the continuity of human nature. To revive, therefore, is to translate, to ferry, and to bring across. It is not surprising, I think, and in this sense, to see Scully emphasizing the importance of placemaking against the advent of international modernism and globalization. Scully celebrates character and idiosyncrasy as benevolent guardians of human individuality. An inspirational leader in the American preservationist movement, Scully criticized the indiscriminate sprawl of American cities, of American suburbs, as a sign of civic decay, as a sign of loss of community, and as a sign of placelessness. And ironically enough, it was as if Norman Mailer's critique of modernism was leaving us, quote unquote, isolated in the empty landscapes of psychosis, had actually touched Scully so deeply that he embraced a contextual architecture of community, thus becoming the inspiration to the American new urbanists in the 1980s. Indeed, Scully made it possible for his students to make distant connections plausible. Connections between classical Greece to the American shingle style. Who could ever imagine that? From Italian rationalism to postmodernism. From the Prairie House to the upstate New York barn. From the Tuscan cityscape to that of American new urbanism. Scully's lectures have been a priceless and unique treasure of both oratory, passion, and wisdom. Scully writes and speaks in formal style to his rivals, intimately to his dear friends, in broken style when he admits defeats, or jokingly when discussing his latest book. As a teacher of architecture, and as a teacher of history, Vincent Scully is indeed the greatest and the most lovable humanist. And this is why we honor him today. Thank you.
morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm indeed very honored to speak here for this prize ceremony, which is unique, I think, in the world. Is that Richard Driehaus prize is honoring the unrecognized. It's extraordinary because when we sit together in this jury, there's of course a large number of very meritorious people who have not been recognized by architectural prizes, which are well known around the world, but who never go to those people, and you wonder why. Now this honoring is not only honoring persons, but also a large set of ideas, which have been important, I think, to the building and humanization of the world. And we understand that humanization is not an automatic nor an irreversible process, but that creating a civic, a well-behaved and prosperous environment is a project which must be maintained with all force and must above all become very conscious. I think that probably the terrible strife and wars which destroyed so much of human lives and heritage in the 20th century has also menaced these ideas which were able to build a positive world. And the process which led to the victory and which carried the victory was so absolutely, I think, dangerous and unconscious that actually the victors in a way contribute to the destruction of themselves. Now Spain, to come to focus the talk, Spain was a country which, like most countries, is incredibly rich with talent in the diverse arts, and where architecture has left a very powerful trace over the last 2,000 years. And this set of ideas which built and rebuilt and made Spain survive for so long, and which spread that culture around the world, was being rediscovered after the terrible blight of Second World War and the problems which happened, the tragedies which happened through the Civil War. And tragically, and completely against truth, classicism and those ideas which had built that civilized world became associated erroneously with fascism and Francoism and all the associations which come with it. Whereas we can, when we look at what happened in Spain in the 1960s, 50s, 60s and 70s, we can say that actually modernism has triumphed in Spain with Franco, that there were only several years where under that regime there was a short revival of traditional architecture, but then it went over to the universal modernism, which really rebuilt the world after the Second World War, and in which rebuilding, or probably destruction, we are still heavily engaged. Now, I remember Spain very well from this period of the 70s and 80s, because there were many, many talented people there who recognized that something had gone wrong in Spain, not just in Spain, but around the world. And there was a lot of exchange of ideas with the young generation growing up, which was full of interest for Spanish architecture of the past. And I used to travel there a lot, knew a lot of people, and then something happens which nobody can explain. Suddenly all these people who were engaged in reconstructing the classical language and reusing it despite the dominance of modernism suddenly disappeared from the scenes and overnight became modernists again. Curious phenomenon. I used to travel to Spain being invited, and then I was no longer invited. And I remember very clearly discovering in Seville this marvelous architecture which is so also attractive to tourists. And I walked around Seville and Granada and photographing lots of buildings which I used in my lectures in London. and in America. And then I found it so interesting because there was an architecture there of different periods, and of course also of the Arab influence, which created this unbelievably powerful, seductive, playful architecture. Now, 10 years later, I went to Seville because we had heard about a person called Manzano Martos, who was in charge of Alcazar, Real Alcazar. And in fact, I discovered then, remembering the pictures I had taken, that many of the buildings I had photographed were not historic buildings built in the 17th, 18th, or Middle Ages, or even I thought there had been an incredibly interesting architect there who had designed in the Otto Wagner mode, mixing influences in this very powerful, manly style of the secession, but with a very powerful local color of Seville. And it turned out that this person was Manzano Martos. He was not an architecture done in the past, but was actually a modern architecture. And I then met this person, and he turned out to be very important there, and he was not interested in publishing. It was very difficult to find a photograph of his work. He didn't have, unlike most architects, a publicity agent. And then Maurice Guillot and I wanted to make a book, but it came to nothing because there were no pictures and we didn't have the money to fund it, and Manzano Martos was occupied with much more important things than publishing books. So I forgot about him. Well, I didn't, but I knew he was there, and he was doing this extraordinary work despite Spain having changed. He was one of the rare people who, despite this cataclysmic change, which wiped out all this intelligence and changed people's courses, extraordinary. There was a critique of modernism which was unbelievably powerful, written in 1980 by Luis Fernandez Galeano, but all forgotten, translated, published in America, but never really taken seriously. So when we were sitting in this jury, because there's this list of extraordinarily interesting people, but I happened to be in Seville, and I thought maybe it would be interesting to ask this man to present, because he's obviously not interested in publicity, in glory, and so on. And we met him, and I asked him to send some pictures. When I saw the picture, I thought, ooh, this is not really publishable photographs, because we are now used to glossy pictures taken with sun and beautifully presented. These were photographs which were taken out of the hand. I would have done better pictures, but anyway, I didn't have my archive with me. So I thought there will be no chance, no glory for Manzano Martos, because he doesn't know how to present his work. The buildings stand there in their pride, in their beauty, but he doesn't know how to photograph them. So we met in Washington, and there was this dossier of 50 pages of beautiful pictures, and then Manzano's pictures, and I didn't say a word. And then, I think it was David who said, this is really an interesting fellow. What, does anyone know anything about him? I said, yes, well, I knew him some time ago. He's really good, but the pictures can't really tell about the quality of the work. And then Richard said, yes, I really like this. I mean, this is really what I want. Because this is not just preservation, this is invention. Because a lot of the buildings which you see around Granada, around Albaicin, around Seville, and even in Catalonia and all around Spain, is marked by this extraordinary person who doesn't sign his buildings. They are unrecognizable as his buildings. Because if you do the things right in architecture, there is no glory. Because the buildings are so integral of the established language, of the established qualities, of the things we expect architecture to deliver, that we think they are historical. But they are no longer self-evident, because to do this quality of work nowadays is an unbelievable battle, because the system works against you, and virtually everything which is done in that sense is a heroic achievement, because once the system is left to its own destiny, it creates the buildings without interest and without any quality. So I welcome Manzano Martos to this Parnassus, because finally there is glory I think, in doing the things right. Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you, Leon. That was very beautiful, very moving. And now we would like to present the Richard H. Driehaus Prize to Rafael Manzano Martos.
Mi admirado Mr. Richard Driehaus, fundador de este premio. Honorable Mr. Michael Licudis, decano de la Escuela de Arquitectura de la Universidad Notre Dame. Querido León Creas y jurado del premio Driehaus. Queridos arquitectos que me precedisteis en tan honroso premio. Cónsul de España en Chicago, profesores y alumnos de esta universidad, queridos amigos todos, tanto de aquí como del grupo de españoles que con tanto cariño me acompañan.
To the Admirable Richard Driehaus, founder of this prize, the Honorable Michael Licudis, Dean of the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture, my dear Leon Creer, and fellow architects who have also been honored with this award, and the Driehaus Prize jury, faculty and students of the University of Notre Dame, the Consul of Spain in Chicago, honored friends and guests.
Nunca como hoy he lamentado carecer de dotes oratorias y más aún en la bella lengua de Shakespeare para poder expresar mi más íntimo agradecimiento y la profunda emoción que hoy me embarga por la concesión de este premio, que lleva el nombre de tan gran mecenas de la arquitectura y que otorga la prestigiosa Escuela de Arquitectura de esta vieja universidad que ostenta el nombre sagrado de Nuestra Celestial Señora y Madre del Cielo. Gracias hondas, conmovidas a todos. Este premio honra a la arquitectura que no ha perdido su eterna fidelidad al clasicismo, que ha sido su lenguaje universal y válido durante los últimos 25 siglos y ha legado su colosal herencia arquitectónica y urbanística al mundo occidental.
I have never regretted my inability to speak in the beautiful language of Shakespeare more than today, in order to express my most humble gratitude and the profound emotion that overwhelms me with the award of this prize, that bears the name of such a great patron of architecture and is given by the prestigious University of Notre Dame and its School of Architecture, which holds the sacred name of Our Lady and Mother of Heaven. My deepest, most heartfelt thank you to all of you. This prize honors an architecture that is eternally faithful to the classicism, a universal language that has remained valid for the last 25 centuries and handed down its colossal architecture and urbanistic heritage to the Western world.
Y ahora, tras pediros una vez más perdón por no expresarme en inglés, permítanme que continúe este discurso hablando en mi lengua, también universal y también honrada por la pluma de Cervantes. A un gran torero sevillano que alcancé a tratar y conocer, Juan Belmonte, ya anciano, le criticaba a un periodista: «Maestro, dicen que hace usted un toreo demasiado clásico». A lo que contestó Belmonte: «Pues si dicen eso de mí, será verdad, y me alegra saberlo, porque como usted sabe, lo clásico es lo que nunca pasa de moda». Me siento profundamente identificado con aquel gran torero, pues a mí también se me ha criticado mucho por mi clasicismo, sobre todo entre mis compañeros más importantes en la profesión. Solo oí elogios, y hace ya mucho tiempo, de un arquitecto que aquí nos honra con su presencia, León Krier, el primero que recibió este premio, que es hoy el más grande que se puede considerar un arquitecto en el mundo. También he tenido el afecto de muchos clientes que me han honrado con su confianza, y el de un gran director general de Bellas Artes del Estado español, Florentino Pérez Envid, y por supuesto el de mi maestro, Fernando Chueca, que siempre me respaldó en mis obras arquitectónicas y que también fue cliente mío en cierta medida. Y ahora ustedes me sorprenden, a tan avanzada edad de mi vida, en los días más tristes de ella, tras la pérdida de mi esposa, elogiando mi obra y sus raíces clásicas y premiándola tan generosamente. Me emociona también profundamente ser el primer español que recibe este premio. España, madre de tantos pueblos, ha sido fecunda cual ninguna en su colosal legado a la arquitectura a lo largo de todos los tiempos.
And now, apologizing once more for my lack of English skills, allow me to continue this speech in my own language, equally universal and also honored by the pen of Cervantes. A great bullfighter from Seville, Juan Belmonte, whom I had the great honor of knowing, was once criticized by a journalist. Maestro, it is said your style of bullfighting is overly classical. To which Belmonte answered, well, if that is what they say about me, it must be true, and I am very pleased to hear it because, as you know, classical means it never goes out of fashion. I feel profoundly linked to that great bullfighter, for I too have been greatly criticized for my classicism, especially among some of my most important colleagues in the profession. One of the few times I received praise for my work was a long time ago, from a great architect who honored us here with his presence, Leon Krier. I have also received the affection of many clients who have honored me with their confidence and patronage, including the great Director General for Fine Arts in the Spanish government, Florentino Pérez Envid, and my own maestro, Fernando Chueca, who always supported my architectural efforts. And now, you surprise me at this advanced stage of my life, and in the saddest part of it, after the loss of my wife, praising my work and its classical roots, and rewarding it so generously. I am deeply moved to be the first Spaniard honored with this award. Spain, mother of so many nations, has carried a legacy of exceptional architecture throughout time.
Yo tenía muy asumidas las críticas a mi obra, que había intentado llevar a la perfección dentro del lenguaje arquitectónico heredado de mis maestros y que mejor conocía, en un mundo que de forma bárbara y suicida destruye cada día la herencia irrenunciable e irrepetible de sus ciudades, su arquitectura y su paisaje que he amado tanto. He dedicado mi vida desde casi mi niñez a una vocación por la restauración de los monumentos del pasado y por una arquitectura basada en el sólido entramado de su eterno lenguaje universal, nacido en el templo griego, codificado en las escuelas alejandrinas por Vitruvio y otros arquitectos helenísticos en los años de la Roma republicana. Este lenguaje llegó a su esplendor máximo bajo dos césares hispanos, italicenses, los más grandes que gobernaron el orbe romano, Trajano y Adriano, por manos del gran Apolodoro de Damasco y del propio Helio Adriano, el César arquitecto, que abrió en su vila Dianea nuevos caminos para la arquitectura que se prolongaron en la Roma tardía y paleocristiana y en el oriente bizantino, sirio e incluso islámico. Tras la caída del Imperio Romano, este occidente roto, que aún intentamos en vano reconstruir, al menos en una unidad de mercado, interpretó los propios recuerdos arquitectónicos de su glorioso pasado y los reflejos llegados de Oriente, recreándolos en una arquitectura vieja y nueva a la vez, que tuvo en el románico y el gótico, con su diversidad de escuelas, un paralelo al fenómeno de la supervivencia de la lengua latina en los diversos romances europeos, el castellano, el catalán, el galaico portugués, el francés o el italiano, y el surgimiento, sin pérdida en sus vocablos de viejas raíces clásicas, griegas y romanas, de los nuevos lenguajes anglosajones.
I had grown accustomed to the criticisms of my work, in which I had sought to perfect the superior classical language of architecture inherited from my professors. In a world that systematically destroys the heritage of its cities, its architecture, and its landscape that I had loved so much. I have devoted my life, almost since childhood, to a career dedicated to the restoration of historical monuments and the preservation of the classical language of architecture, born out of the Greek temples and encoded in the Alexandrian schools by Vitruvius and other Hellenistic architects in the year of the Roman Republic. This language attained its maximum splendor under the two Hispanic Caesars, Trajan and Hadrian, the greatest to govern the Roman world, and at the hand of the great Apollodorus of Damascus and of Hadrian himself, the architect-ruler, who explored in his own villa new architectural ideas that would extend into the latter era of Rome and the early Christian tradition, as well as into the East Byzantine, Syria, and even Islam. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the Western world interpreted the architectural memories of its glorious past and combined them with reflections of Eastern architecture, recreating them in a style that was both old and new. In the diverse schools of the Gothic and Romanesque period, this new architecture emerged in a way that parallels the emergence of the new Anglo-Saxon vernacular without losing from its vocabulary its ancient roots in the classical Greek and Roman.
Todo este pasado medieval iba a olvidarse tras la profunda renovación filológica del lenguaje antiguo de la arquitectura impuesto por el humanismo renacentista, que surgido en las repúblicas italianas mínimas, pero ricas y cultas, iba a invadir Europa, iniciándose por España y Francia. La vuelta al lenguaje antiguo no significó una copia servil de la arquitectura del pasado clásico, sino la creación de una arquitectura novísima, que recuperó la perfección lingüística romana y le dio nuevo impulso y capacidad evolutiva hacia el manierismo y hacia una nueva corrupción barroca. Sin renuncia a su frigidez aparente, el neoclasicismo fue capaz, no obstante, de generar un romanticismo clasicista, prolongado en el siglo XIX en la evocación historicista de los lenguajes medievales y fundido todo en un eclecticismo que iba a dar forma al más copioso volumen de edificios y ciudades jamás construidos por el hombre. Y el clasicismo todavía dio vida al modernismo y al art déco, que acabarían dando paso a un esperanzador movimiento moderno, sentado sobre las bases de una arquitectura nueva, que había nacido con la espontaneidad de una nueva especie arbórea, el rascacielos, medio siglo antes aquí en Chicago, y que iba a dar abundantes frutos en manos de una generación genial que desgraciadamente no llegó a generar en plenitud un lenguaje arquitectónico nuevo y universal, y que hoy vemos sumido en profunda crisis. Como en el momento final de la Edad Media, el clasicismo se nos vuelve a presentar hoy como una posible opción salvadora en la búsqueda de una nueva geometría para la arquitectura y de una construcción basada en las raíces formales y en los materiales constructivos de cada región, de cada ciudad y de cada cultura.
All this medieval past was in danger of being forgotten because of the profound philological renovation of the ancient language of architecture imposed by Renaissance humanism that, from its birth in the small yet rich cultural republics of Italy, was going to sweep across Europe, starting with Spain and France. The return of that ancient language did not mean a strict replica of the architecture of the classical, but rather the creation of an extremely new architecture that recovered the linguistic perfection of Rome and gave it a new drive and ability to evolve into mannerism and towards high Baroque. Despite its apparent frigidity, neoclassicism was able to generate a romantic classicism which was continued in the 19th century in the historical evocation of the medieval idioms. All this combined into an eclecticism that was to create one of the largest numbers of buildings and cities ever constructed by humankind. Furthermore, classicism gave life to modernism and Art Deco, which in turn would prepare the way to an avant-garde movement based upon a new architecture which was born with the spontaneity of nature. The skyscraper, half a century earlier, here in Chicago, which was very promising in the hands of an exceptional generation that, unfortunately, was not able to develop a new and universal architectural language, and that today is suffering a crisis.
Termino manifestando de nuevo mi agradecimiento a todos. Mis padres realizaron grandes sacrificios para que yo pudiera realizar mi vocación arquitectónica. Mi madre me inició en los principios del dibujo. Mis hermanos primero, Concha, mi esposa y mis hijos de mi casa me han acompañado en los días felices y dolorosos de mi aventura vital, supliendo mis flaquezas y dándome el marco de serenidad que ha hecho posible mi obra. Tuve grandes maestros en la Universidad Española, Torres Balbás, Gómez Moreno y sobre todo Fernando Chueca, arquitecto y máximo historiador de la arquitectura española. He tenido la colaboración de grandes artesanos, carpinteros, canteros, escayolistas, y he tenido grandes discípulos y compañeros y grandes amigos, algunos comitantes también de mi obra, también grandes compañeros de universidad y de academias, sabios en sus respectivas materias y plenamente representados entre los que habéis querido acompañarme en este acto tan importante en mi vida y que la generosidad de los presentes supera con su grandeza la modestia de mis méritos. Muchas gracias a todos. Thank you very much.
I close now with my sincere gratitude. My parents made great sacrifices so that I could achieve my career in architecture. My mother introduced me to the principles of drawing. My siblings first, then my wife, Concha, and my children have accompanied me through the happy and painful days of my life's adventure, filling in for my weaknesses and giving me the serenity necessary to complete my work. I had great teachers in the University of Spain, Torres Balbás, Gómez Moreno, and above all, Fernando Chueca, an architect and the greatest historian of Spanish architecture. And I have had great students, colleagues, and friends, some of them working with me, colleagues at the university and in the academies, all full of wisdom in their respective subjects, represented here by those of you who have accompanied me in this ceremony so important in my life, in which the generosity of those present exceeds in the grandeur the modesty of my merits. Thank you.
thank you for joining us today and honoring our remarkable laureates. Their accomplishments and contributions to the greater good serve as an inspiration to us. As this year's winners illustrate, once again, classical architecture and urbanism have global significance that transcend any particular architectural style. We have honored laureates from France, Great Britain, and now Spain. It is often said that the world has become too homogeneous. The example of today's laureates and their predecessors remind us that classicism sustains a sense of place. That attaining a greater degree of visual coherence in our architectural surroundings is one of the main tasks of architects, planners, and developers. The classical principles of this prize are the foundations of our civilization. They define who we are and provide continuity and context to move forward in a way that respects our past and allows us to learn from it. The goal is not to resist change, but to incorporate it into the continuum of human experience, drawing on the past to build a better future. The goal of the Driehaus Prize is to use history to give the present greater depth and continuity. Edward T. McMahon of the Conservation Fund expressed this idea well. He noted, "Growth is inevitable and desirable, but destruction of community character is not. The question is not whether your part of the world is going to change. The question is how." That is the animating philosophy of the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture and Dean Michael Mikludis. It has been a privilege to work with Michael to build this prize over the last 8 years. He has, as Paul Goldberger wrote, managed the remarkable trick of simultaneously being broad-minded and deeply committed to tradition. I personally congratulate Rafael, Manzano, Martos, and Vincent Scully on their lasting contributions. Rafael, Manzano, Martos has worked across cultures. He has beautifully blended Western and Muslim influences in a way that honors the historical sources while enhancing contemporary society and building a foundation for the future. Vincent Scully's legacy includes his tireless protection of cultural treasures threatened with extinction. Also, the dozens in the audience today and thousands around the world who learn to appreciate and interpret the built environment around them. Chinese educator and reformer Madame Chiang Kai-shek said, "We live in the present. We dream of the future, but we learn the truths from the past." These truths are embodied in our laureates. I salute you both. And before I conclude with this video on Rafael Manzano Martos, filmed in the city of Seville, I would like to also give additional contribution to Mr. Marcos of another $100,000 for his use in preservation, classical construction, and education. So, thank you.
Yo lo que no sé, sí, escúchame, que antes estaba hablando
Dice, ¿y tú cuando terminaste? Digo, pues ya era como 3 o 4 años. Y me dice, ¿y qué estás haciendo? Digo, pues mira, trabajando con mi padre. Oye, ¿quién es tu padre? Digo, Rafael Manzano. Rafael Manzano Martos.
¿no? Pero lo vamos a hacer unos chavos, ¿no? O sea que lo que yo quiero ahora es un poco que hagamos esto a partir de lo que ya tenemos. Porque tú esto lo tienes que ir preparando para... Vamos a ver esto, cómo se ve aquí el... Bueno, está bien, ¿eh? Tiene rotundidad y fortaleza, ¿no? ¿Eso tendrá la misma profundidad que el del patio de contratación? Más
Sí,
o menos.
sí, el mismo.
Lo mismo.
28 creo que sí.
Muy bien.
Sobre todo que estas vigas, don Rafael, vienen en una medida de 40 por 40, impresionante.
Esta madera traída de América,
Sí,
paseada de América a Europa, es verdaderamente. Es que es un pino melis. A mi gusto ha quedado todo muy bien. Y que además se ha montado allí con una facilidad tremenda.
Sí,
¿no?
eso ya el montaje.
El lazo de...
Para formar luego las estrellas de 8.
Es precioso. Entonces, a mí me gustaría aquí llegar a un enlace tal cual este, ¿no? Y ver de meter aquí algún polígono, ¿no? Aunque fuera solamente
algo así, ¿no?
Sí, enriquecer.
Enriquecer eso, ¿no? Aquí, en el derribo de un edificio que era aparentemente moderno, y se sacó de la nada salió un patio, almohade muy importantísima. Y luego me di cuenta de que faltaba esta arquería y que estaba fragmentariamente sepultado en un gran montón de escombros que había en el medio del patio. El jardín es la imagen del paraíso terrenal. Como veis, está surcado por 4 acequias, 4 ríos, los 4 ríos que regaban el paraíso terrenal. Y en el centro había un estanque, una alberca central con una fuente donde brotaba el agua que corría por debajo de esos puentecillos en las 4 direcciones. En la restauración de monumentos hay que inventar lo mínimo, pero ese mínimo no se debe dejar de inventar. Es fundamental que las cosas queden terminadas y con una coherencia artística y con una coherencia también documental. Cuando se construyó la planta alta, en tiempos del emperador Carlos V, la torre externa quedó deprimida, quedó como enterrada bajo las cubiertas. Felizmente, tras las cubiertas en la parte trasera, pude encontrar toda la decoración pictórica e incluso el alero primitivo, ese de ladrillo que ven ustedes allí arriba, rojo, y todos los elementos necesarios para poder reconstruir lo que asomaba originariamente por encima de los tejados, subirlo para que aflorase de la misma manera por encima de los tejados modernos del siglo XVI. La arquitectura sin lenguaje que hoy practicamos casi siempre es incoherente con el contexto arquitectónico heredado y ese conjunto monumental que intentamos salvar y que las leyes protegen, pues simplemente con la introducción a veces de un solo edificio moderno y equivocadamente moderno, pues puede quedar destruido precisamente por la presencia de un elemento incoherente en su contexto. La arquitectura clásica tiene que también adaptarse en su lenguaje a los usos, a las exigencias y a las necesidades de los nuevos tiempos. He procurado renovar, reconstruir aspectos de áreas perdidas de la ciudad, reconstruirlos, incluso reconstruirlos con cierta libertad para acoplarlo a las nuevas necesidades y exigencias. Hay que intentar dar vida a la arquitectura clásica con todos los elementos disponibles en la mano del arquitecto y en la mano de sus ejecutores. Es ocultar las dos vertientes del tejado, la ocultamos con esta cornisa, con esta moldura, tema este, que es el que yo quería hacerle esta especie de oreja. esta es la ciudad que hemos heredado y si queremos conservarla tenemos que ser ávidos para penetrar, interpretar y leer la arquitectura que nos transmite, la arquitectura heredada. En estos edificios más antiguos de la ciudad tenemos la clave, tenemos el código genético de la misma. Tenemos sus colores, sus materiales, sus volúmenes, su forma de organizar los huecos, de organizar la decoración. Estos temas cerámicos, por ejemplo, de aquí, son específicos del lenguaje arquitectónico de Sevilla. Y si queremos conservar el conjunto histórico heredado, si queremos conservar la ciudad monumental, tenemos que ser fieles a este código que tenemos que estar leyendo e interpretando cada día, en cada casa, en cada monumento, en cada rincón de la historia del conjunto urbano.
This concludes today's award presentation. As you can imagine, putting this prize ceremony together, the jury, every year, is not easy. And it really wouldn't be possible without a really wonderful staff. I'd like to thank my staff for all their help and devotion. Particular Cara Kelly, whose burden it is every year. I would also like to thank my colleagues and students at the school, the university administration for its unwavering support of our mission, and of course to all the former laureates of both the Richard H. Driehaus Prize and Henry Hope Reed Award, who come year after year. Also want to thank our present and past jurors, and of course, Richard Driehaus, for all that you do. And thank you all for coming, especially our guests from Spain, who traveled, 50 of you, I believe, traveled over the Atlantic to be here today with us and celebrate this wonderful day. So, thank you all. And finally, please join us in the foyer for conversation and some light refreshments. So, have a good day.